In the 1990s, a struggling screenwriter by the name of Kevin Williamson happened to read about some horrific murders that took place in Gainesville, Florida, the result of which was the movie Scream. This is the true story that inspired one of everyone's favorite horror movies, the story of Danny Rolling, or the Gainesville Ripper. On August 24th, 1990, the first in a series of 5 killings rocked the town of Gainesville, Florida. Now, Gainesville wasn't really that big of a town. In fact, the biggest thing about it was the fact that it housed 2 different colleges, which unfortunately seemed to make some people easy prey. And on this particular night, a man silently slipped into the apartment of Christina Powell and Sonia Larson. Now, hours after sunrise, Sonia and Christina's friends started to realize something was amiss because they were calling their friends, leaving notes on their door, and the girls never responded to any of them. Eventually, after having not heard from Christina or Sonia all day, friends called the police and had them come over to investigate, which seems like a reasonable thing to do. I mean, if I can't get a hold of you and you're my friend and you're not ignoring my calls like some people do, then I'm gonna have someone do a wellness check on you. Anywho, police arrived at the house, agreed that the scene was pretty suspicious, and decided to go inside, which is unfortunately where they found that Sonia and Christina had been brutally murdered. Now, like in any other case, people might think this was a crime of passion because it was very personal and it was very painful and it was incredibly over the top. Both of the girls had had their mouths covered with duct tape prior to having their hands bound together. Ooh. And police suspected that Christina had been killed first, just repeatedly stabbed to death until she died. Then it's suspected that the killer went after Sonia, who he brutally raped more than once, then stabbed her, then cut off her nipples as a trophy. And after the murders of Sonia and Christina, police didn't only have little to go off of, they also had little time to try and find some sort of lead. The next day, Christina Hoyt, a college student as well as a clerk at the police station, didn't show up for her regularly scheduled shift. Now, Hoyt was pretty much super reliable, so that automatically set up big flashing red flags to her coworkers, who called police to ask them to investigate and check to see if Christina was okay at home. The hell kind of shape is that? So, urged by Christina's coworkers at the police station, the cops went ahead and went on over to her apartment to take a look around. They pounded on the door repeatedly. Nobody answered. They yelled in. Nobody answered, which of course made them sus. So officers went ahead and entered Hoyt's home, where they ended up finding an incredibly gruesome scene. Christina Hoyt had unfortunately been visited by the same murderer who visited the other 2 girls the night before. And it was clear because the MO was exactly the same. Not only had Christina been raped, stabbed, and had her nipples removed, but this time it was way worse. Because not only had the killer already mutilated the body, but this time he decapitated Christina Hoyt, put her in an upright position at the edge of her bed, and left the head sitting on a bookcase. Now, I think this is generally what we say when a killer is getting like more brazen. Now, of course, after the murder of Christina Hoyt being as vicious as it was, the police and the Gainesville community were on high-ass alert. Now, it appeared that the killer was targeting women, college students, who had brown hair and brown eyes. But that really didn't matter to a lot of college students because a lot of students, whether they fit the victim profile or not, were hightailing it out of Gainesville pretty much as fast as their parents could pick them up. In fact, over 700 people cut and run as quick as they could after Christina Hoyt's murder. Of course, the female students were especially on edge because so far only women had been killed. Many students on the campuses got together and decided to spend nights with groups instead of alone or with a singular roommate because they figure if there's a whole bunch of us, maybe he won't come in. Unfortunately, the precautions taken by a lot of students at the campus didn't exactly save everybody. On April 27th, 1990, 2 more students were struck down by the killer who was now known as the Gainesville Ripper. See, Tracy Pauls felt pretty safe with her longtime friend and roommate, Manuel Tabota. Now, to quote Scream and show that there's a tie-in, Manuel was big and played football and, well, could beat the shit out of you. Unfortunately, Manuel was asleep when the killer entered the apartment, was overpowered, and subsequently stabbed and murdered. Which really only tells me that our killer is a big fat coward because he went after a man while he was asleep. I mean, isn't it a little jacked up to get the drop on somebody while they're asleep? Unfortunately, after Tabota had been taken down by the Gainesville Ripper, it was Tracy's turn. And if big old Manuel couldn't take down the Gainesville Ripper, then Tracy really didn't stand much of a chance. However, the killer must have been either afraid that he was going to get caught or interrupted because unlike his other victims, he didn't mutilate Tracy or Manuel. And despite combing every murder scene, police could not find any information, any clues that might implicate somebody. And it was because this particular killer was incredibly smart. See, the Gainesville Ripper somehow had knowledge of police proceedings and crime scene investigations because he knew enough to not just wipe things clean, but to use cleaning solvents to wipe down bodies so that any trace of semen would be kaput. And after the murders of Tracy and Manuel, the killing stopped. But police were able to get at least a little information when a man who was accused of robbing a Winn-Dixie was involved in a high-speed chase. And the man who was arrested on that robbery charge was Danny Rolling. Now, Danny was a native to Louisiana, but his father was a longtime police officer. And I mean, like, spoiler alert, am I right? Now, a triple murder that occurred in Louisiana several years before is actually what clued police in to the idea that Rolling might be their killer. See, that triple murder involved a woman named Jolie Grissom, her father, and her nephew. And it just so happened that Jolie had been posed in a provocative manner after she had been stabbed to death. I mean, and you know that the cops' heads were just going ringy-dingy-dingy. Unfortunately, though, it wasn't until January of 1991 that police really caught some hot information. Now, because of the similarities in the Gainesville and the Shreveport murders, police requested that any person who had been imprisoned in Louisiana have their DNA tested. You guys, that's like a lot of freaking DNA. Anyway, it just so happened that Danny Rolling's DNA was close enough to a match that they could charge him with the Gainesville Ripper murders. And once he was arrested, Danny confessed to everything. And so Danny was arrested, convicted, and eventually executed for the Gainesville murders on October 25th, 2006. And now, I know what you're all thinking, but while Scream was based on the Gainesville Ripper murders, those writers obviously took a lot of liberties and time to poke fun at the horror genre. Just remember to never say, "I'll be right back." So let me go put on some lashes and I'll be right back with your final look. All right, guys, I'm back and this is your final look. Do you like it? I'm loving it. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, guys. And I hope that you enjoyed the true story of the Gainesville Ripper that inspired Scream. I hope that you'll come back and visit me next time. Until then, don't forget to click like and click subscribe. And don't forget to remember to always love yourselves, always be a unicorn, and I'll see you next time. Bye!